Welcome, welcome, welcome to yet another edition of Valley Talk Live. I am Jeff Crow, joined by my partner in crime, Mr. Marcus Ruiz Evans. Hello, Marcus.
Hey, it's good to be here in crime and in legally sponsored ways to make money and do productive things.
There you go. Anyhow, we are joined by the leading in the polls currently, I guess you could say, gentleman running for governor on the Republican side of the aisle, Mr. Tim Donnelly. Hello, Tim.
Oh, it's great to be on with you guys.
Awesome. Great to have you. Well, let's start off with just tell our audience here at 1680 AM, Fresno, all about yourself. Give us the lowdown, who you are and what you've done.
Well, I'm the third oldest of 14 kids. I came to California when I was 19 with $300 in my pocket, and within a decade, I met and married the most amazing woman on the planet, and she was a young widow with 2 boys. So now we added 3. We have 5 sons and a grandson. And I had my own business in manufacturing and was living the California dream until along came the government.
Yeah, that government thing seems to always get in the way of our businesses.
Well, it sure does. I mean, government's become the greatest threat to our future.
Interesting.
To our future success.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, anytime I've ever started a business, it seems like government is the biggest thief that I've had to deal with. Not really the people coming into the shop or the store or whatever. It's the government wanting to take as much as they can in tax dollars and everything else. But
yeah,
carry on.
And you're not alone. I mean, this is it. People are figuring this out. In California, you didn't need a poll that 72% of Americans figured out that it's not big business or big labor that's the greatest threat to your future success. It's big government. And look, there's something we can do about it here in California.
Yeah, well, there's certainly something we can do about it, and it's called getting rid of the guys in office, right?
Well, we got to get rid of Jerry Brown in particular. You look at his reign over California. It started almost 40 years ago, and he's taken California from first to last in everything that matters. Remember when our education system was the envy of the world? Now our highways are crumbling, and he wants to build some high-speed rail. He might as well make it from here to Texas, not from L.A. to San Francisco. But meanwhile, we've got a government-created drought all Central Valley because we haven't made the investments that need to be made in water infrastructure. What about a high-speed waterway?
Huh. No doubt. It seems like government, and Jerry Brown is a prime example of this, wants to do what they want to do rather than what is good for the people. And, most of the time staying out of the way is what's good for the people. But they use this phrase, good government. Well, if you look at Governor Brown's dad, Pat Brown, he was what I would call the old time tax and spend liberal. At least in that era, we got things out of it. There's still a highway system that was built with tax dollars. There were UCs and CSUs built under his father. Today's tax and spend liberal, it seems like they're taxing heavily, and we don't really have a lot to show for it.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and it's really sad because Californians deserve a whole lot better than a guy who has made California number one in everything we don't want to be. We're number one with the highest tax. You look at all the taxes we pay, we're number one. I mean, income tax, sales tax, fuel tax, and yet we have more people dependent on government and we've got more people living in poverty than any other state.
Yeah, and this particular region of California is rivaling Appalachia and places like that when it comes to unemployment and whatnot. And I really enjoyed how when the water crisis, which we all, I think anybody with a brain knows is man-made, when it actually hit years ago, but when it really hit where this was the breaking point, he and President Obama, they come out here, and instead of figuring out a way, talking about ways to increase water supply, they talk about how to hand out more EBT and food stamps to people, and how to hand out federal money and some state money. I'd rather have water than a government check.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is you'd rather work than collect welfare, and there's so many people that are now becoming dependent on government, and they don't want to be. They want to work. And I think it was insulting that when the President of the United States left here, he didn't realize how critically important it was to address the water situation and not just write a check.
Yes, money does not quench thirst.
No, and it's this federal encroachment, this Endangered Species Act. We need to turn on those pumps. And you know what? If 4 buckets of minnows have to die so we can feed the world, so be it.
Yes, that's a very simple and easy way to put it. I actually wrote an article back in 2009. I interviewed Mario Santoya of the California Latino Water Coalition, and he's a Democrat. And I also interviewed the mayor of Clovis at the time, who was a Republican, and they both agreed that if nothing was done, and this was back again in 2009, that California would hit a very, very bad spot. And they were predicting that within 5 or so years, I believe it was, this would hit. And exactly 4 years later, the proverbial you-know-what hit the fan with this issue. And now we're really in a spot where it's dire. It's a dire strait. And like you said, we are the breadbasket of not just America, but the world.
That's right. We're the number one food producer in the world. We put that at risk. And this was a government-created drought a long time before it stopped raining. And what is lacking is not just rainfall, vision. We needed to have invested in the increased storage, and we needed to store water rather than just let it out for a fish or to flush the delta out, which is what everybody knows is what they're doing because they've been using the delta as a toilet. That's the dirty little secret of Sacramento and San Francisco and some of these other cities that don't want to invest in properly treating their affluent and their sewage. That's the bottom line. But you know what else? Obviously, if we had a better forest policy, which, of course, so much of this land is owned and controlled by the federal government.
Thank you.
And so they become the greatest impediment to smart forest management, which would be a whole lot fewer trees per acre, and a lot of that water would come down. But right now, as you guys know, I'm not telling you anything new, but we're about ready to burn up the groundwater, and once you destroy the land like that, it doesn't recover.
Yeah, certainly, and then there's the added benefit, if you will, again being sarcastic here, of massive forest fires because nobody wants to cut any trees down. Nobody wants to thin the herd a little bit.
Thank you.
And so what happens is when we do have forest fires, they're far worse, and then the trees go down anyways.
Yeah, what we need is balance. We need vision and we need balance. And there's a lot of wisdom in the people, but the government wants to rule over us, and they come in there with these agendas, and they say they want to protect an endangered species, but what they made into an endangered species are jobs, opportunity, and freedom in the state of California.
Yeah, no doubt. In fact, I saw a piece from George Carlin, the late comedian here, and a lot of people view him as being more liberal-minded, but on endangered species, if anybody wants to YouTube that one, I encourage them to do so, because he's quite conservative. He was quite conservative on that. He points out that, and his stats were true, that irrespective of anything we do, 20 species a day go extinct, because that's what nature does. And over 90% of all the species that have ever been on the planet are gone. And as he said, we didn't kill them all. That's what nature does. It's
the same thing in the business world. I mean, look, there's no wagon wheel makers anymore. We've moved on, and you either lead, follow, or get out of the way. That's human progress.
Certainly.
And it's funny. The government wants to exempt itself from the rules of nature. And look at what they did with all these bank bailouts, and said some industries and some institutions are too big to fail, but they let a whole lot of people lose their homes and their jobs and businesses, because that's part of an economic downturn. It's just what happens.
Yes, and from what I understand, I think Marcus knows a little bit more about this, but didn't the government primarily go after, when it came to criminal prosecutions of the housing bubble, the lower level people? Marcus, carry on with that. I think you are more in tune with that topic.
I would just recommend to everybody to check out the Frontline series by PBS, Frontline, and look for the episode called The Untouchables. The Untouchables, like Al Capone and the guys who fought against Elliot Ness. And what it documents is the FBI's efforts to actually go after the people who caused our 2008 global financial collapse. And we know that was because of games out of Wall Street. Now, what the FBI has done, interestingly enough, is not go after anybody from Wall Street or anybody who actually controlled the banks, all of which are located in New York State or Delaware, but instead go exclusively after the low-level people who sold home loans here in California, who are primarily African-American and Latino. That just doesn't seem balanced or anything resembling justice. The Untouchables by Frontline.
Wow, that sounds like a fascinating watch. And it's amazing, but we see it in politics all the time. The people who have the money, they are connected to the people who have the power, and there's really two parties. There's the political power class, and then there's the people, the rest of us. And the bottom line is they're supposed to rule at our consent. But the truth is that they rule at the consent of a very small group of people, and that's what's got us in the trouble we're in.
Yeah, in fact, I believe your GOP opponent, I won't say his name, but I believe he actually was one of the orchestrators of the Bush Rove bailout, and then of course it carried on into Obama. From what I understand,
that's right.
He actually was one of the people who was the author of TARP.
I can't argue with that. He ran TARP instead of a business, and he's having a tough time explaining why he voted for Obama. But that's his deal. My opponent that I'm focused on, Jerry Brown, because Jerry Brown is the one who has done so much damage to California. And yeah, he has a lot of money in the bank, but he doesn't have enough money to cover up what he's done to the average person.
Certainly, and his political party. What do we have now? 3 state senators that are under federal indictment, including one for running guns and all kinds of. Good Lord!
That guy was a big gun control nut. who wanted to take away your right to defend yourself when Jerry Brown's dumping these violent criminals and dangerous predators onto our streets and into our neighborhoods. And he wanted to make you feel like a criminal for buying a gun and wanted to ban the bullet button and a whole bunch of other things. And he was trafficking guns to terrorists in exchange for campaign contributions. You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, in fact, I saw that he was trafficking RPGs and getting into machine guns. Meanwhile, he was giving speeches to all of us about how our streets would be safer because we now can only have, I don't know, 6 bullets or whatever it is now in a semi-automatic handgun clip, or, you know, good I mean, it's just like you said, you can't make this stuff up. And
no, you can't. And you know what? That one's an easy one to see because it's so crystal clear and it's easy to cover that story. But let's take the real issues. If education is your biggest issue, well, how's Jerry Brown done? Well, if you're a teacher, your pension is now at greater risk after 4 years of Jerry Brown because the unfunded liability on pensions has gone up, not down. So epic fail there, number one, for teachers. And yet the teachers union backs Jerry Brown and basically has bought Jerry Brown. Number two, now they're trying to force the curriculum that a lot of parents are having issues with, and a lot of kids are struggling with, this Common Core. And, and Jerry Brown signed a bill to put the boys in the girls' bathroom and locker room and on their sports team. Now, how's that going to get us into the top 3 spots in education?
Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So if education was your issue, Jerry Brown and the Democrats are not on your side.
Yeah. I guess back in the 90s when I was in high school, I would have really had some great statistics if I got to play on the girls' softball team. I would have hit a lot of home runs. I would have been RBI champ, home run champ. You know,
you would have been a contender.
That's right. I would instead I had to compete with the boys, and I didn't make the team.
That's unfair.
That's a great story.
That's just not right.
Yeah, I was discriminated against.
But if you work, so let's take another issue. Let's take the economy. We have over 2 million people out of work, and we just watched Jerry Brown on his watch. We watched Toyota take 5,300 jobs to Plano, Texas. And What did he do about it? The guy was missing in action for 3 days. Then he shows up and says, "Oh, this is the creative destruction of capitalism." You know what? The guy's a Marxist. This is not the creative destruction of capitalism. This is the non-creative destruction. This is the everyday destruction of government and too much government.
Well, let me ask you generally, we're talking about the economy now. A lot was made of the March jobs report by the federal government, and people are talking about how, that's such good numbers. I guess we're out of the recession. The U.S. Department of Labor in March 2014 released unemployment rates for states. Now, the unemployment rate for the nation is 6%, but here in California, it's 8.1%. And then when you get to the Central Valley, it bumps up to 12%, or 2 times the national average. So what I'd like to ask you, Tim, if I may, are we out of the recession? Is everything just fine? I'm hearing this from Governor Brown supporters, President Barack Obama supporters. Is everything okay? Jobs are coming back?
Hey, Jerry Brown is saying that he's created 1 million jobs. Well, I haven't seen any evidence of private sector job creation. So either they're all government jobs or they're all jobs that are in Texas. I don't know. The bottom line is when government grows, liberty shrinks. And when government expands, opportunity contracts or it leaves. Because capital with an A, that equals opportunity. Capital is drying up in California. We have a drought of capital, just like we seem to have a drought everywhere. So Jerry Brown's real legacy is the economic drought. And the bottom line is, you got to ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And I think the answer to that for most Californians is no.
Yeah. Mr. Donnelly, were you in the state assembly, state senate? What offices have you held before running for governor here?
Well, I am currently in the California State Assembly, and I was elected in 2010. Before that, I ran my own manufacturing business. I was in plastic, and I watched California regulate my customers out of the state. I want to do what they're doing in North Dakota. We need to frack our way to prosperity and drill our way to prosperity rather than sitting on an ocean of oil and importing it from our enemies. And USC has done a study that said it would create up to 3 million new jobs over 5 years in California, $25 to $30 billion in additional revenues. That means we get California working again, and we start paying down these unfunded liabilities and this mountain of debt. That's just common sense. But you know what? One of the beautiful things about it, we could have a whole different immigration problem. Can you imagine what would happen if we did that? We'd have a tsunami of U-Hauls coming back on the 10 freeway, coming back here from Rick Perry's Texas, coming back here to make California gold again.
That would be awesome. I can picture that.
Yeah, no doubt. That's traditionally California from the gold rush on. That's the way it was. Wagon trains and cars coming this
Absolutely.
way. And I mean, that my family, one side came from a southern state, one came from a northern state, and they came to California after World War II, after fighting bravely, I might add. Most of my great uncles and grandfathers and whatnot, they came here, and it was the land of prosperity. And now it's amazing that we have people to the tune of 500,000, I believe, a year, according to Congressman McClintock when we interviewed him. They're going to the Nevada and Arizona desert for prosperity.
Yeah.
They're chasing jobs and opportunity. Look, I want my boys to have the same opportunity that I had to pursue the California dream without having to leave the state of California to do it. Nobody wants
Right.
grandkids to grow up somewhere else.
That is perfect.
Yeah, I don't, myself too, I don't want to have to be an 80-year-old one day talking about how California once was to my hopeful future grandkids, which hopefully won't be for quite some time. My daughter's only 8 years old. She better wait a while before that happens. I don't want to have to talk about the memories of how our family came here and after a generation or two had to leave. I mean, it's astounding in how California just seems to chase away industry and chase away jobs and whatnot. And you got a governor who signed 805 new laws in a state where the greatest complaint is that we're overregulated. Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, Mr. Donnelly, I've seen Democrats in particular, talk about how they measure government and how well somebody has done in Congress or a state legislature. Well, how many bills did you pass? How many laws did you pass? And I think it should be the other way around. How many did you repeal?
Exactly.
Yeah, you had some really good ideas on how to do just what Jeff's talking about. Now, you and I had talked a little bit earlier. These may not be as active right now, but I still like this idea. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim. AB 223, the Bureaucracy Realignment and Closure Act of 2013. This would allow for successful business people from the private sector. They get to identify where to trim the fat in government, and they get to make suggestions on these are the particular agencies that we in the private sector feel are really hurting us. That's a great idea. I think you had another one on you were going to, I will fight to require mandatory sunset provisions on all regulations, requiring them to endure scrutiny and approval before being reinstalled. Those two ideas right there alone, a review of all regulations before they're allowed to continue on and be grandfathered in, and then why not actually put private sector business, the people who make jobs, in the position almost co-equal to our elected decision makers, and ask them.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, because what a lot of the general public is probably not aware of is a law gives birth to a whole bunch of regulations. The regulations are promulgated through 571 boards and commissions, and most of those individuals are appointed by the governor or the speaker pro tem or the speaker of the House. And it would be a completely different state. We could transform the regulatory climate if we put people on those boards and commissions from the industries regulated. Then you would have people who actually have some know-how and experience and some skin in the game, and they would make regulations that make sense. And you know what? Right now, the government doesn't trust the people, but the people are competent, and the founders always believed that we were completely capable of ruling ourselves, self-rule. So if you're making rules on yourself in your own industry and you take pride in that, then you're going to make regulations that are good, that you buy into, that we don't need as many regulators to enforce, because you have voluntary compliance. And there's a mutual respect. Right now, one of the biggest complaints about business owners, I talked to a number of my customers, and I went through it myself, is that the government treats you like you're the enemy. They harass you. They show up, and they're there to fine you. And I read another bill, AB 1721, which would have said the California Air Resources Board should give you a fix-it ticket rather than a fine. And that gives you a chance to get into compliance with whatever they're harping about that day. Look, we all want to have clean air, but we don't want to destroy economy in order to have a perfect environment. There has to be a balance.
Yeah. In fact, I have my own version of cap and trade. Let's cap the number of laws that can be on the books at any given time. And for every new law that's passed, we trade off two others that are on the books.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something like, let's cap the number of laws, and then let's trade our governor with the governor from Texas or Arizona or someplace that's actually booming.
Yeah. For every law that's passed, there's this would make a great ballot initiative in my opinion. But for every new law that the state legislature passes, two laws have to be taken off the books.
Well, how do
there you go.
I mean, how do we know? I know partly you're joking, Jeff, but I think that's kind of a good idea. They had a California Constitutional Convention in 2009 where they were pointing out the California Constitution is one of the most complex legal documents in the world, not just among states. It's like the largest constitution or second largest in all of America, one of the largest government founding documents or boilerplates for government in the world. You have a constitutional convention sponsored mostly by Bay Area liberals who were saying the Constitution's too big. And then on top of it, we want to add 800 new laws this year. I think at some point, we have just vastly too many laws, too many statements in the Constitution. How many overlapping, not just agencies, but policies are we making? How do we know that 800 new laws that the governor signed today, we didn't already have 500 of those in some version on the books already? Are we doing that kind of litmus test before we just add more regulation, or is it regulation ahoy?
Well, that's a fascinating question. Last year we passed a bill, AB 60. I fought against it, but ultimately it was signed into law by the governor, and it was very contentious. They negotiated it in the last 3 hours of session. And it was one of the worst pieces of legislation I've ever seen. It was designed to give people who are in the country a legally driver's license. And a lot of people disagree on that issue, but they felt like that it was something that they wanted to do, so they did it. They had the power, they had the votes, they did it. The problem is that they wrote into the code the entire anti-discrimination aspect of California law. And when you do that, then if you discriminate against somebody who has an identification, they present it for work or housing, but by discriminate, I mean deny them work or housing, because their document says, hey, I'm illegally present in the country, then you could be sued under California law, under this new law. Then if you did hire them, then you had knowingly hired somebody in the country illegally, and now you're subject up to a $50,000 fine and prison time.
Yes.
So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So it made it actually more dangerous, if that's even possible, for a business owner to hire people that he needs to hire. And so this year, the same author, Luis Alejo, is running another bill, maybe 1660. He thinks it's clever, to essentially decouple the federal aspect so that you wouldn't be reported to the federal government, and that couldn't be used to actually prosecute you. I don't even know if it's a practical solution to a problem, but what it illustrates is many of the laws they pass are so poorly thought out, they create the need to pass another law and another law and another law just to fix the problems that the first law created.
Yes, absolutely. And with that issue also, it's ironic. I've talked to Hispanic Democrats who are actually against the way this law was written on a number of grounds, and one of which is it clearly says driving privilege on there, not driver's license. So any officer that pulls somebody over, the second they see that it says driver's privilege, I believe is the phrase, it's an absolute red flag. So it's not, and so a number of folks I've talked to, they're encouraging illegals to not get these licenses because it's a total red flag. And then on top of that, the law requires literally that an officer just blindly just act like they didn't see that. And I mean, it's, if they're going to hand out a license to somebody, then that's, it's, you don't do it in such a way that you literally force. It's bad for actually everybody. It really is. It's bad for the person who's getting these licenses. It's bad for the officers that have to write somebody a ticket based on that. It's just no good across the board.
We've made the rule of law a mockery. I mean, when you can actually practice law, even though your presence here is in violation of the law, but you can't and are not qualified to sit on the jury, but you're an officer of the court by being able to practice law, something's wrong.
That's brilliant.
And there were ways that these issues could have been addressed without creating new precedents and undermining the rule of law, which is the cornerstone of a republic. And a lot of this is going to be resolved at this point in Washington. But we have to be very, very careful that the solution, whatever they come up with, is not worse than what we have now.
Yes, exactly. And that brings up the point of, there's been obviously Supreme Court rulings that we have to trim down the number of people in state prisons and county jails. And I understand that, of course, when we were packing people into gyms, we were packing people in hallways, literally, when it came to our prisons, that there's ways to reform our criminal justice system without the way Governor Brown did it, which is just, hey, let's just put it off on the counties and force the counties to handle it.
He dumped it down to the county level. Then he gave a disproportionate reimbursement to each county. Places all along through the Central Valley got a fraction of what they get in L.A. and San Francisco. So it's patently unfair. It's unsustainable, but mostly it has put public safety at risk. Crime is on the rise. You want to know what the first thing a Governor Tim Donnelly would have done with the prison?
Yes.
I actually ran in 2010 on a simple proposal. And I actually offered it to not governor, but gubernatorial candidate Meg Whitman. And she told me her consultants, same consultants who are still running races in California, thought it was a bad idea. Well, it was a simple idea. Why don't we deport all of the illegals in our state prisons back to their home country? Most of them come from Mexico. We could set up a private prison there. That way we don't have to get involved in all kinds of, State Department negotiations. It's a private transaction. So now they're down there. They're serving out their time. Instead of paying $60,000 a year, we negotiate a contract for $1,000 a month.
Right.
$12,000 a year. So now we send a team of free sheriffs or auditors from the state. They make sure they're still in jail. And then we wire them the money. And guess what? When they get out, they don't get social services paid for by the taxpayers. They don't get a probation officer paid for by the taxpayers. We're not providing them food and education to their children, because the bottom line is they are in their home country, and when they get out, they will be on the streets of their home country.
And they ruined their opportunity. They came here and they ruined their chance, whether legal or legally. Why are we taking care of them?
If you came here illegally and then committed a crime serious enough to go to state prison, nobody wants you here.
Thank you.
So that, I mean, I've even talked to a lot of the activists on the other side. I've talked to the Speaker of the House. There's broad agreement. But the bottom line is you have to make sure that you serve the interests of justice. And you know what this would have done? It would have ended the early releases. It would have freed up enough prison space so that the entire situation with the federal court, the three-judge panel, they never would have forced this edict down on California that has put our public safety at risk. It has put people at risk in their own homes and neighborhoods, all at the same time while the government tries to make you feel like a criminal when you want to buy a gun to defend yourself.
Yes, and that brings up another point. There's, if we have a lot of things that we could reform that would keep people out of the system, and one would be some of our ridiculous gun control laws. So many of these laws are technicality laws to where, you have a firearm and it doesn't comply anymore to some state law that even many lawyers probably couldn't interpret that law for you.
When the government is making the law-abiding citizen into a criminal when they have done nothing wrong, and they are not even aware of being in violation of the law, they have lost the moral and ethical basis to govern.
Ooh,
and let me give you an example. There was a sheriff I was talking to, and because I mentioned this on the floor of the House, because one of my colleagues put up a resolution. He said, we need to lecture Washington, D.C. We need to bring a California-style assault weapon ban to Washington, D.C. And I said, okay. I raised my microphone, and I said, Mr. Assemblyman, I have a question. And they said, without objection, you can ask your question. I said, I would just like to know what constitutes an assault weapon. And then I paused. And he hemmed, and he hawed, and he couldn't figure it out. He kept looking at his notes. He said, well, it's kind of mostly superficial. It has to do with the stock, and it has to do with...
the way it looks, cosmetic.
Oh, yeah, the way it looks. Oh, and silencer. And I started laughing. Silencers have been illegal since the 70s. So I said, I'm shocked that you would try to regulate something you don't know anything about. And I said, no, I'm actually not shocked. Because I talked to a sheriff, and that sheriff told me that his deputies had pulled over an individual who had what thought was an assault weapon in the back seat of the car. So they took the man and the weapon into custody. They took pictures of it, and they tried to get some kind of a definition from the local DA. And the local DA couldn't give them a definition. So then they went up to the state level, first to the county, then to the state, and they went all the way up to the Attorney General of California, and nobody could tell them what constitutes an assault weapon. So they let the man go.
Yeah.
And the sheriff said to me, the laws are so complex and so convoluted that I don't know how anybody can keep them, but I can't even keep up with enforcing. And the bottom line is an assault weapon is just a weapon, and it looks scary, and it has these features that somehow offend certain lawmakers, but they just really use it because they want to ban and ultimately dismantle all guns. That's the goal of certain people, not all people, certainly not all Democrats. There's a couple of Democrats in there that have stood with us on the Second Amendment. And I've gone over and thanked them for it. But the bottom line is there are other people who have a complete agenda of completely disarming the law-abiding citizens, but they're not willing to put the criminals in jail when they commit crimes with guns.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's another area, too, of law that could be altered somewhat in order to free up space. And when we talked to Congressman McClintock, we talked to him about some of the drug laws and specifically the marijuana laws in California. Now, nobody will ever defend alcohol abuse or marijuana use or any drug use. Really, it's all bad. It's all bad, no matter what. But he pointed out that the federal government never had the authority to regulate vice law, gambling laws, prostitution laws, any type of alcohol regulation, or even drug laws historically from our colonial era all the way till 1937. Ironically enough, these great progressives like FDR, that was when the first federal marijuana law was passed, and it was done in the name of public health, public safety, and not public safety, public health, healthcare issues and whatnot primarily, and we were going to, make a better society. And so they essentially took, as McClintock explained, they took away the rights of the states to have whatever laws, regulations that they deemed necessary for their citizens. And at the time, I think he said drug use was about a 5% issue in the country. And since Prohibition, it's gone up to 12, 15, sometimes 20%. And so one of the areas that we could probably do something about, we have not changed our laws, and that's going to take something from the people to do so, that and the Supreme Court and whatnot. But while we still have laws where we have these laws, they have to be enforced. But what he had suggested, and I've heard some other conservatives suggest, is that we bring these people back to God. And that doesn't sound very fashionable or PC in today's world to put people into programs that are faith-based and whatnot. But he made a good point that typically when someone is abusing alcohol or drugs or whatever, that's a sign that they are missing something else in their life. And, then you look at like an AA program or an NA program, they don't cost anything to the government, yet they have been some of the most successful in getting people off of these things.
You're exactly right. They are some of the most successful. They are completely self-contained, and they don't cost the people a penny because they're funded by the people who are going through the program. And look, I agree with you. I'm actually running a bill right now that would take some of the wobblers or take some of the drug laws and give the discretion back to the judges that we've taken away, because I don't want to fill up the jails with people that just have a drug problem. And here's the deal: why are we having government save us from ourselves when really what is needed is to invite the faith-based and other communities, anybody who wants to help and be part of a program that doesn't cost us anything. By the way, for 8 years, I did a Bible study in a men's prison camp and also taught life skills.
Yes.
And really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. It didn't cost the government anything. All they do is let me in and give me a room and a table. I oftentimes brought in treats that were cooked by some ladies here in the community. Mm-hmm. And so they had homemade cookies, and that was part of the draw to bring people to to the study, and we studied the Bible. We talked about life. I taught him about doing interviews and some of the things that were available out there, because a lot of these people had only known a life of crime. And you're right. There's something deep in the heart of man that yearns for God, and only God can fill that space in the human heart. And people fill it. You see all these people, actors and everybody, who are extremely wealthy. They have everything in the world, and they OD on drugs at a young age.
Yes.
Because they feel like they're missing something. And so a lot of the problems, and I get what you're saying, and I agree with it completely. A lot of the problems in our society shouldn't be and can't be solved by government. And it's time that we start helping each other and helping our neighbors and getting involved in our communities just as individuals, and not through a government program. We don't need to hire a whole new or create a whole new department to deal with every new pathology that comes down the pike.
Yeah, amen. Exactly.
Amen.
And I completely agree with what you're saying, and it's quite it's quite heartening, and makes me proud that there are people like you out there that have stepped forward and are willing to work with folks to help them better themselves, and so that they can get out of that trap, that cycle, and become productive citizens. And then instead of costing us $50,000 a year to incarcerate, they are now unfortunately paying California's high taxes again. But, I mean, I'd like to see those taxes cut still, but,
So you want to spread the pain.
And I guess in some ways, once people look at their tax bill, I don't blame them for grabbing a drink sometimes.
That would,
I'll tell you, one of the guys that I worked with in the prison camp, he got out. He is the first person in his entire family that turned away from being a drug dealer. And he has maintained for the last 6 years productive work. He's married, has 2 children now, and he started his own business and even came to me to ask for advice on stock to invest in, because that was always a passion of mine, and I would talk about it sometimes. And I thought that was just the absolute highlight. And to this day, he still has my cell phone number. I know it sounds a little bit odd, but
no, not odd at all. Not at all.
That to me, there's something so valuable that I got out of helping him, and he wound up helping me to build something in my own life. And so I think that's not government's role to mandate it. Government's job is to get out of the way. A business is to get out of the way of us raising our families and leave us alone. We don't need government to redefine parenthood. We don't need government to redefine anything. We need government to protect and preserve our fundamental liberties, for them to respect and protect our inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to leave their grubby hands off our private property and get their hands out of our wallet.
Yes, absolutely. And just drug laws, gun laws, almost any problem, as the theme has kind of been here, almost any problem that society has, there's always been traditionally we always had private individuals step forward and take care of the issues. Our people who have a family member who's addicted, if they're willing to get help, they help them. If they're, all government can do is call out a social worker or a police officer or somebody that's going, and they're going to end up in a system. And governmental systems, I don't care what the topic is, almost every time there's a government system, it makes the problem far worse. So anyhow, let's move on to another topic here. Marcus, go ahead, and if you want to do a follow-up question, we have about 8 minutes left. Go ahead, Marcus.
We're in the last bit here, Tim. And I gotta ask you an existential question. I think you're gonna have a great answer. Something I like to do. We had Ron Nuring on earlier, the Republican lieutenant governor candidate, and we asked him the same question, and also when we talked to Tom McClintock, kind of the same thing. So, Tim, you had talked about we have the worst taxes, we have the worst schools, we have the worst roads. And I wrote a book. Yes, Jeff, I'm going to plug the book. California's Next Century 2.0, Marcus Ruiz Evans. I'm only bringing that up to say that in that book I go into a lot of details showing how for decades, not the last 2 years, not the last 5 years, not the last 10 years, we have had in California, according to the federal government of all 50 states, essentially the worst roads, dams, seaports, airports, levees, federal buildings, other infrastructure, basically everything it takes to run a modern society. And while we have the worst of everything that it takes to run any modern society, we also at the same time are blessed by having essentially the worst taxes in the entire country. This is not new. You know, everybody knows the Golden State era ended somewhere in the early 80s. We have been in a coast on our laurels for decades. What is it why haven't the California people waken up to the fact that we're hemorrhaging businesses? People are leaving. The schools, the roads, the dams, the airports, the seaports, everything. The levees. The levee over Sacramento has been rated by the federal government as worse than the one over New Orleans before Katrina. They've done nothing about it. Californians don't get upset. Governor Schwarzenegger, say what you will, was the last person I saw who actually was willing to tackle the fact that we have this massive infrastructure problem, even though we could have done more to do with taxes. Why aren't Californians aware of the gigantic hole we have been slowly sliding into, not recently, for decades? Why aren't we aware? What is it going to take? How much worse does it have to get? Isn't it bad enough?
Because Californians are like the frog that has been in a pot that's been boiling for a long, long time. And they haven't noticed the increase in temperature. Because people don't react to theoretical discussions about infrastructure, like you're saying, until it affects them. Until they hit the pothole where they notice that the 5 freeway is a disaster. And, oh, yeah, the governor wants to build a high-speed rail so that rich people can cruise by all these neighborhoods in air conditioning at, some predetermined set speed. And the bottom line is that if it doesn't directly affect the individual, they don't care. But when all of a sudden the schools are, and you're trapped in a failing school and there's no way to escape because they won't give you school choice, well, your zip code shouldn't determine your future. So people start to notice that, and then, we get a little safety valve. Well, the other day, I was talking to a motorcycle who was traveling all over the West. He was from Texas. I tried to get his vote, but he said he already had a good governor. But he did say, he said, you guys need a new governor. I said, really? Do you know Jerry Brown? He said, no. But he said, I know your roads. He said,
thank you.
You have the worst roads in the West. And I believe that the condition of a state's roads determine the condition of its finances.
Thank you.
Yeah. And they're just simple wisdom. And we haven't built to accommodate the growth that we already have. You could be sitting in traffic in Los Angeles now trying to go 20 miles, and it takes you 2.5 hours. If we needed any kind of a rail anywhere, they ought to put a monorail above some of those surface streets there. And I bet Los Angelinos would be happy to pay to ride on that. But I bet you it could be done by the private sector a whole lot cheaper and faster and better than the government.
Yeah, imagine if Disneyland's monorail was built by government. It would never have gotten finished. It would still be. It would have been started in the 50s, and it would still have about halfway to go, and then they'd have to redo the first part of it because it's antiquated.
Are you saying that the key to making California the happiest place on earth is to tap the private sector and get the government out of the way of prosperity and the free market?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Emphatically.
Yes. Simone.
Okay.
All
Hey,
right, then you need to vote Tim Donnelly for governor.
we've been speaking of which, we've got 2.5 minutes left. So why don't you tell everybody out there how to get a hold of you, your websites, and anything that you'd like to throw in here. Tell us, Mr. Tim Donnelly, please.
Hey, it's real simple. It's elect Tim Donnelly, and that's Donnelly is 2 N's and 2 L's. ElectTimDonnelly.com. You can Google me. You can find me on Facebook. Bottom line, we are going to do this a different way. We are going to be walking California door to door and having neighbors introduce me to their neighbors. So if you want to be part of something to take back the Golden State and make it the land of opportunity, we can use your help. ElectTimDonnelly.com. You can go on there. You can donate. You can volunteer. You can get involved instead of sitting on the couch. But we need your help, and we need it now because the election is June 3rd. And I also need you to remember, vote for me on June 3rd and tell 10 of your friends.
Amen. That's right. You know what? I think that. I don't think. I think that it's obvious that you're probably going to be the best choice out of the Republicans. I've looked at some of your opponents or your main so-called opponent, and anybody affiliated with the Bush name right now is lost their stock with me, and I'm not gonna say too much about the opponent. But again, folks, I would again, the web address you said was elect Tim Donnelly, correct? .com?
It's electtimdonnelly.com, and you can also ask a question. You can send us an email, and we'll get back to you.
There you go, folks. electtimdonnelly.com, and Mr. Donnelly will be. What area are you from? We've got about 40 seconds left. What area are you from?
I live in Twin Peaks, which is in the San Bernardino Mountains, right next to Lake Arrowhead.
Oh, okay.
6,000 feet.
Beautiful.
Nice. So you're not too far from a couple of places of prosperity called Arizona and Nevada. So, but hopefully we can bring that inward here a little bit towards that coast down there, and then up here and further north. So, anyhow, again, folks, electtimdonnelly.com, and thank you, Tim, for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me on. God bless and Godspeed.
All right.
Thank you, Tim.
On behalf of Marcus and myself, we are out.